unions are an issue. In fact, in 2017, the Washington Post took a look at how often in big city departments those who'd been fired for misconduct had to be reinstated because of the strength of police unions. We'll put that chart up on the screen as I ask you, does any of that change in the aftermath of Chauvin?
I don't know if it changes in the aftermath of Chauvin. It should change. There's no question about that. But if the process and the system doesn't change, then the answer to that is going to be no. It is not easy to get rid of a bad police officer. We fire them. They go through a arbitration process, which is behind closed doors, by the way. You were just talking about, shedding a little light on trials through cameras. Well, the arbitration process is very, very quiet. And these arbitrators will make decisions that will make you just shake your head in disbelief. And bottom line is the officer gets back, but not only do they get back, oftentimes they get back with back pay, and even lost overtime is credited. So it's very, very difficult, but it does need to change.
Chief Kelly, how do we fix that?
Well, with some difficulty, there's no question about it that I think chiefs or CEOs, commissioners need more power to get rid of problematic police officers. You can see a pattern where someone may have 30, 40 complaints against them, where the average is maybe 2 or 3 in a career. Those types of people have to be identified, and there has to be some sort of mechanism to have them expelled from the police department, maybe to another job in government. But most of the power to do that lies in state legislatures, and that's where it's going to have to take place. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, because police unions are powerful, no question about it. They make donations to campaigns. They're pretty savvy as to how to work both in state houses and in Washington. But it is something that needs to change.
Chief Ramsey, that's the end of the road. That's the firing process. Let me now go to the hiring process, because in today's Philadelphia Inquirer, there's a quote that jumped out at me from the head of the New Jersey Police Benevolent Association, the largest state union in New Jersey. It's on the screen right now. Every action has a reaction. When you vilify every police officer for every bad police officer decision, people don't want to take this job anymore. I can't tell you, Chief Ramsey, how many callers to my radio program this week said, I'd never take that job, meaning in law enforcement.
Well, it's a difficult time. There's absolutely no question about it. But it's also an opportunity. That same article, I believe Philadelphia is down 268 officers. But we have to get smarter about how we recruit and market and target populations of individuals who we think would make good police officers. And these are people who probably never thought about law enforcement as a career. I happen to be one of them. I wanted to become a doctor when I was a young person, and accidentally became a police officer. But we need people with a service mentality. I really see this as an opportunity. This is a time, a unique time, when change is really going to occur. You can be a part of that if you join us. You can be a part of something very special. Instead of standing on the sidelines complaining about police, become a police officer and make a difference in your community. And that's the way we ought to approach it. Not a woe is me type of situation, but an opportunity to improve the profession.
Chief Kelly, I'm trying to run through some of the big picture issues and relying on comments that I've heard all week long. So here's another for you. Do you have a concern that police officers will now be too hesitant, including too hesitant, to use force, deadly force, if necessary, because of all of the attention on so many of these different cases?
Sure. Police officers are hesitant across the board. They're demoralized, they're confused, they don't know what the public wants them to do. They've been demonized in the press, demonized on social media, so they've backed off. They're not engaging in the way they used to pre the death of George Floyd. And we see the result of this. We see a record rise in homicides last year, 30% nationally. So, yeah, they are backing off in all sorts of ways because they're concerned about their well-being, their families' well-being. And I think that's what's brought about the rise in shootings and murders. And this continues this year as well. So I'm not as optimistic as Chuck is on recruitment. I think it's a real crisis. We have to really do some hard work in thinking about how we can attract qualified police officers. I'm concerned that we may lower the standards just to get sufficient number of bodies. So this is a real crisis for law enforcement with no easy answer.
Chief Kelly, a follow-up for you, because there's a broken windows question here, and New York City has a record in that regard. I was reading a Heather McDonald opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal that put this in my head today. Should traffic stops be reconsidered, as an example, or do you think, hey, sometimes that which we overturn because of, say, a missing inspection or a registration, a tag issue, leads us to other things? Can you see now a debate taking place where some say, don't pull cars over?
Well, I'm told in the UK that there are very few car stops. They do it all through technology. So let's see if technology can do a lot of this. But I think we have to be concerned that if there are no car stops, no law enforcement involvement, people simply won't get licenses. They'll just go and violate the traffic laws in many ways, not register their vehicles. So you have to think this through. It is no question a dangerous thing for police officers to make stops. We've seen that in the recent past with the killing of a state trooper in New Mexico and other locations. Cops don't necessarily want to do it. They've been required to do it. So let's see if there is an alternative. Right now, I don't think we're there.
Chief Ramsey, same question to you, but with an additional component. In the George Floyd case, of course, allegedly it all began with a counterfeit bill. Now some folks are saying, you know what, maybe police shouldn't be the ones to respond in a retail circumstance. Should we narrow the field of when the police get called?
Well, I mean, there are some instances where police don't need to necessarily be the first responder, but there are many instances where it's appropriate for police to respond. I think the problem here is that we've lost the balance because of these high-profile cases, the George Floyd type cases with Chauvin and so forth. There's no real balance, and when we look at policing now, it seems like people are actually painting all police with a very broad brush. You know, they're looking at the very worst in the profession, such as a Derek Chauvin, and they're kind of painting everybody with that same brush. And, you know, we've allowed the few to define the many, and somehow we've got to be able to turn that around. There are ways in which issues can be addressed short of police officers showing up on the scene. But you mentioned the Bryant case, for an example. That was one where it was already out of control. It was very violent behavior. Do you really think a social worker or a mental health professional would have been able to deal with that situation under those circumstances? I don't think so. So it's not that easy. But we do need to think about what we want our police to do. And I think that's legitimate to have that conversation. But then the issue has to be transferred somewhere else, and the funding has to be in place in order to make it real.
Commissioner Kelly, give me the final word. Take my last 30 seconds and tell me, big picture, what is it that you most want people to know?
Well, I want people to know that policing is a noble calling, a noble profession. Police officers save lives every day. We saw a classic example in that Columbus, Ohio shooting. Just imagine if we didn't have body cameras, though, to record what happened there. It would be a major, major event. As it is now, even people are complaining what that police officer did. He's a hero. So policing is a calling. They do great work. I'm just concerned now about recruiting and whether or not we're getting the right people into the business.